Hi everyone. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about Copilot Connectors because Microsoft has just put out a blog post in the last few days looking at new experiences with Microsoft 365 Copilot with expanded Copilot Connector catalog. And you can see here we have a bunch of new or just gone GA Copilot connectors that are available. And Copilot connectors, as we probably all know, are the things that used to be called graph connectors. And the concept of a Copilot connector, or previously a graph connector, is that we've got all of our data in the Microsoft graph. Most of it is the data that we have within Microsoft 365. So you have your emails, you have your Teams messages, you have your files, etc., etc. We know that that's the scope of what you see if you do a search in Microsoft Search, or if you're using Copilot. And then on top of that, when Copilot arrived, Microsoft added on top the semantic index. So instead of just doing kind of keyword-based search to get that information in the graph, suddenly we were able to do semantic search, where it wasn't just about matching kind of the keywords or the key phrases. It was about actually understanding the intent of the document. And there will be different people watching this that may have different opinions about the success of that layer. But certainly that is the intent of semantic indexing, is to give you that ability to just know what something is about and surface that, whether it's in Copilot Search or whether it's in Microsoft 365 Copilot. But there are very few organizations that I work with or I know about that just use Microsoft 365. Most of us have stuff somewhere else, whether it's because we use a CRM that's outside of Microsoft's estate, or whether it's because we have some files sitting on a file storage system somewhere else, or a ticketing system. There are all these kinds of things that people use day to day, where they've chosen something that either they don't like the version of it that sits within Microsoft 365, so they want to use something that better fits their needs, or there just isn't a capability within Microsoft 365 to do X, and so that business needs it, and so they go off and procure something else. And so suddenly this promise when it comes to Copilot of it just has access to all your data, that no longer holds true, because you've got this valuable business data over here in a different system on a different platform, and we're having to work out how do we bring it back over to Microsoft to work with it. And so Microsoft has a tool to do that. Back in the days when it was just Microsoft Search, these were called graph connectors. These have now become Copilot connectors, and you can see from this blog post that they're actually bringing through a lot more of these. And if you're wondering where you come to look at these, if we're in the admin center, then we actually just have a gallery of these different options, and you can go through and you can add them. And depending on what they are, they have different amounts of setup that you will need. For example, if I want to use let's see here, so a file share, for example. So if I want to add a file share, then I'm going to have to go through and I'm going to add some kind of agent, a graph connector agent on premise where my file share is. That agent is going to work on my behalf. I'm going to have to register an app in Azure in order to use this. So there's a certain amount of setup that arrives with that. But once you've got it set up and you've got your access control lists and so on and so forth synced across from one platform to another, then we could just surface that information in Copilot in exactly the same way we do other information that's in the graph, because essentially what we're doing here is we're bringing over a copy of it. We are indexing it as part of our graph data, and if we take a look at the information on semantic indexing here, you can see that Copilot connector data is actually part of the tenant level index. However, Microsoft has muddied these waters a little recently. And one of my reasons for making this video was just I found this slightly muddied. And so I thought some of you might also find this a little bit muddied. So I wanted to talk about the difference between synced and federated connectors. So All of these connectors that we're seeing here are synced connectors. We add a connector. As an admin, you're going to go in and you're going to add something. You're going to authenticate to it as an admin, and you're going to set up a way for that data to come into your graph. But hang on a minute, you'll see here that there are some of them that are saying these are enabled by Microsoft. And so how exactly does that work, that they're enabled by Microsoft if these need admin setup? Well, these ones that you're seeing that say enabled by Microsoft, and there's a few of these that we're seeing as we scroll through, are actually connectors that you will see if you haven't set up anything here at all. These are connectors that you'll already see under your connectors. So what Microsoft is doing here is actually, and I'm not sure that I agree with the branding around this, because Copilot connectors are a certain thing that are to do with syncing data across, or that has been the case. And so you're creating a copy of your data and you're indexing it. That's available to Copilot. It's available in semantic index. So we have an equivalent type of data access in Copilot for that external data as we do for the internal data that's in Microsoft 365. Now, with these federated connectors, we've got something slightly different. And what these are going to do, and right now they're only going to work in Researcher, and they're only going to work in the kind of Researcher tool area in Copilot Chat, they're going to allow each individual user to log into this service and then create a connection for that user to what they can see in that service. And instead of this being a synced connection, what this is going to be is more like a Power Platform connector, really, where we make a request. It's an MCP request versus an API request, but we can think of them in the same way. We say, hey, search for X. We want to find this ticket. Can you find my notes on something? And this service will give back whatever it has been defined to give back. So we are no longer reliant upon Microsoft Search and semantic index to get the right answer. We're reliant upon whatever search capabilities the service that we're going out to actually provides. And to some degree, this is smart because, you know, there are some things that we work in that are live. You know, we want the up-to-date version of the data, and so it's important to get that. But it's also more similar to the way that competitors, to be frank, like OpenAI or Anthropic, are working with connectors that they've got available in their chat products as well. They're not bringing over vast swathes of data into their services. They're actually doing this kind of request and get something back kind of setup there that we're seeing here. And I know Microsoft went to great pains back at Ignite last year to talk about Work IQ and how Work IQ is the kind of intelligence layer that sits under Microsoft 365 Copilot, and how it transcends connectors. When we're talking about connectors, I think at that point we were referring to the connectors like OpenAI or Anthropic have. And now we have this setup where we essentially, these federated connectors are just connectors in the same way that everyone else is doing this. Now, the aspect of this that isn't clear right now is, how did the ambitions of Work IQ as the intelligence layer for Copilot actually interact with both of these different approaches to Copilot connectors? Because at one level, you could say, well, you've got kind of first-class connectors, which are the ones that are synced, and then you've kind of got second-class connectors, which are the federated ones, and we can do stuff with the synced ones that we could never do with the federated ones. But theoretically, and this is just me hypothesizing here because I don't think Microsoft has said anything about this, but theoretically, when we think about Work IQ, we're not just thinking about data that brings us that intelligence. We're also thinking about memory that brings us that intelligence. And once we've done a search out to a federated source and we've brought data back in to, say, a researcher response, right now this is limited to researcher, but I'm assuming it might come somewhere else as well. Once we've brought that back into context, then we have made that context part of Copilot's memory. And so if we needed that connection to HubSpot or Notion to find that data initially, to what degree will Copilot within its memory capabilities and within Work IQ be able to track the fact that when we're talking about that project or we're talking about that particular topic, that there's always going to be relevant data out in Notion or out in HubSpot or out in Canva or wherever it is that we're talking about with those federated connectors, that it should then seek out in order to do the best for you, and maybe, maybe seek out proactively. And it would also be very helpful for there to be an overarching explanation of how these different features fit within Work IQ. So I'm hoping that will be coming. But for now, I think this is a very interesting direction that we're going in. If you're using services that are in this new package of connectors that have been created by Microsoft, there's really no downside to you in taking the time to get that connection set up. There's only upside in being able to see that data in Copilot if you're using Copilot, if you're adopting Copilot. Now, the one place that I'll say to be careful with that is if it's really difficult for you to match access control from one solution to another because of how you've set it up. You need to think about that just to make sure that you're getting the data over to the right people responsibly. But beyond that, there's no downside to doing it. The same true with the federated connectors. I can't see that really if you've given users access to data in these other platforms, then there's no downside to allowing them to be able to use them. And when these actually roll out to tenants, they're just rolling out now in Frontier, they will by default be turned on for all of your users. More data for AI, more data for Copilot, more relevant context for your requests is only ever going to be a good thing. The more relevant information you can bring into your prompt, the more context you can build in your conversations, in general, the better the output is going to be. So Microsoft providing these services and making it easier to use them, I think overall must be taken as a good thing for those who are trying to adopt Microsoft 365 Copilot. So there we go. That's all I really wanted to say about this. Hopefully this information was useful to you if you were looking at this and thinking, well, I saw some announcements about federated connectors. I've seen this announcement. What are we actually talking about? I wanted to clarify some of that. Let me know down in the comments how you're using these tools. Are you turning them on? Are you concerned about them in any way? Ask your questions there. Thanks for watching through to the end. Until the next video, bye-bye.